Oh my God. The 120-year wait is going to continue for brave Scotland. The full-time whistle just blew at Murrayfield. My heart rate is coming down. That was a classic test match. That was incredible. That was easily one of the most mesmerizing games I have watched all year. And you can take a glass half full or a glass half empty approach in terms of the All Blacks performance. You're going to get a glass half full one from me today, because even though they were wearing white and not their iconic black home jersey, in many ways this was classic All Blacks psychology. They hung in there in the second half. They weathered an extraordinary storm from Scotland. There was a wave of momentum, emotion, passion, fueled by history, that you just don't see very often in rugby. There was something transcendental in the stadium for about 25 minutes there. Not to get too spiritual or mystical for you, but when that crowd in Edinburgh found their voice, when they were singing, when they were willing on the men in dark blue today to get that first ever win over the All Blacks, it sort of felt like the irresistible force. And you may say that Scotland, not the best team the All Blacks have played this year. Sure, Springboks are better. Argentina's ranked higher. France is ranked higher. But for 25 minutes there, the Scots really played like gods. And I do feel that that third quarter was one of the most difficult periods the All Blacks have had to weather all year against any opposition, because Scotland played to their full potential. The All Blacks had to endure through 3 yellow cards, and they need to improve their discipline. This scoreline could have been much more favorable to the All Blacks if their discipline had been better. They made it difficult for themselves today, there's no question. But the fact that they were able to withstand those attacking raids from Scotland, hold them up over the line twice, shut down multiple attacking plays that Finn Russell was orchestrating, that gives me a lot of hope, because what you saw was vintage All Blacks psychology, if not vintage All Blacks form. And just towards the end of the game, I was thinking, these are the All Blacks we've known and loved for 100 years. Mentally tough up here. Everything didn't go their way today, but they found a way to win. And let's give a shout out to Damian McKenzie. One of the most impactful bench performances in All Blacks history. He came on and won the game. He scored the clutch try. He pulled off one of the best 50-22s you were ever going to see at exactly the right moment. And then he nervelessly slotted a penalty that killed off the Scots on an angle. 45 meters. The smiling assassin. This might be one of the coldest screen grabs in All Blacks history. Look at this. Never going to forget that moment. So shout out to Damian McKenzie, and a standing ovation for the All Blacks. They hung tough. They found a way to win. All right, guys, those are my emotional thoughts. I'm going to take a deep breath, maybe have a little cold beverage, then I'm going to walk you through the game and how we got to this final 25-17 scoreline. The All Blacks leaned into their history. They picked Kamate. I thought it was a fitting Haka. It was a superb Haka. The intensity was palpable, and the All Blacks got off to their best start of the year. Josh Lord, replacing the injured Scott Barrett, he picked up a try in the second minute. The big unit really had his game face on here. There was a huge split in the guard defense from the Scots around the ruck. Josh Lord clocked it, and because he has such long, rangy limbs, I mean, at 6'9", he's one of the biggest units in the All Blacks. He had his mitt around the ball, concealed from the Scots. He simply picked it up one-handed, busted up the middle, and then he put on a perfect pass to Roigard. running a support line, as always. He dots down, and I was just very pleased by that. You know, the Scottish crowd today was just full of beans, and you needed something to quell them initially, or you felt that they were going to be the 16th player in this game, giving the Scots a one-man advantage, although that's a fairly ironic comment from me, considering that for half an hour of this game, the Scots did have a one-man advantage. The All Blacks could not stop getting yellow cards. We'll talk about that in a minute. Discipline, the Achilles heel for the All Blacks, a little bit reminiscent of Buenos Aires this year, although in that case the ABs lost, not today. Scotland got the chance to attack soon after, and while they weren't as clinical as New Zealand, there were some ominous signs when Finn Russell was going long to wingers Steyn and Graham. The Scots were making inroads, and if you actually take a look at half-time at those post-contact meters, those line break meters, they were very similar between the teams. So Scotland was carving up the All Blacks at times. In the 19th minute, you just saw more clinical recycling from the All Blacks. I want to mention Leicester Fainga'anuku. Now, this bloke makes a few mistakes. You're always going to get a couple of handling errors out of this guy because he is perpetually going for the offload. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's not on. But you have to love the endeavor. And I'm even going to invoke the name of the great man, Jonah Lomu, not comparing Leicester Fainga'anuku's finishing ability to Jonah Lomu. But what is similar is the ability to draw in defenders. And I made a note here that Leicester was sopping up defenders kind of like how bread sops up soup. He would invariably draw in 2, 3, sometimes 4, and still manage to get the ball out the back door, recycle it, sometimes get an offload away. And that was creating space in other parts of the field. So even though he has had a rough edge to his game for a long time and will probably always have that rough edge, I just feel you get so much out of the physicality of Leicester Fainga'anuku. And even if he's not finishing, it is creating space elsewhere. And that was a very pleasing aspect of the first half from a New Zealand perspective. The All Blacks drew Scotland offside. They had penalty advantage. Looked likely that they were going to score a try, but ultimately Quinn Tupaia knocks it on over the line. And I don't think there was really any deficiency in the All Blacks attack here. I think you just have to say the Scottish defense was spirited. They were not ready to concede a second try so quickly, so full credit to the brave Scots. They defended valiantly through this period. The Scots needed a little bit of magic. They got it with a beautiful 50-22 from Finn Russell. But the All Blacks D was looking up to the task as the Scots started building phases. They held up the flying winger Graham, so big tick to the All Blacks defense for that one. I mentioned in the preview for this game that I liked the combination of Peter Luckite at 8 and Wallace Sititi at 6 because I felt it would let Sititi play his natural game, barnstorming runs, offloads, getting a bit wider into the trams. Peter Luckite could just be like a bloodhound, hitting every ruck, and that's what happened here. He picked off a few rucks today. Great performance from Peter Luckite, but he got a nice turnover here. It led to Roigard kicking deep. Caleb Clark put the returning winger into touch. Really clinical play there from the All Blacks. That led to more New Zealand phase play. Led to another penalty advantage, but this time the ABs opted to go for the points. So Barrett steps up. He kicks 3. I like that, you know, just settle things down a bit. Scotland had just repulsed a pretty hot All Blacks attack, so I think the ABs just felt we need to come away from this visit into Scottish territory with some points. So now it was 10-0, pretty auspicious early lead here for New Zealand. Unbelievable statistic, though, that the Scots have made 100 tackles in the first 30 minutes. I believe that's about how many tackles they made in the entire game the previous week against the United States. And I did make a note here. This could pay dividends for New Zealand in the last 10 minutes. In the 32nd minute, though, the All Blacks were the architects of their own demise. They got a yellow card for a trip by Leroy. This was totally fair. He's a young player. It's a bad mistake. Hopefully he won't do it again. But, you know, when you're green like this, as talented as he is, you know, you might get the odd brain explosion. So Leroy goes to the bench. Scotland goes hot on attack, but again, the All Blacks defense is really up to the task. They hold up another Scottish try. So ABs really actually managed this first yellow card pretty well, and in some ways pulled the momentum back in their favour. Scotland was trying to probe the blind side, but really not getting much joy from it. The All Blacks were able to plug that area pretty well at times on defence. They gave up a few metres, but invariably they scrambled. Given that they were one back down, the All Blacks started leaning on their forwards. They used the scrum to their advantage. They drew a penalty advantage, and Sititi gashes Scotland down the blind side coming off the back of that scrum. He feeds a flying Will Jordan, who hasn't scored a try in, I believe, 4 tests. Now it is 0-17 at halftime. Absolutely clinical first half from the All Blacks. The run of play certainly didn't always go their way, but that was one of the better halves from the All Blacks this year, I felt. So I was feeling pretty upbeat heading into the second half with just a little bit of fear factor in the back of my mind. And I think that comes from the fact that there were so many Scots in the Lions this year. And there was just such a sense of occasion. And I guess my concern was if there was any sort of swing in the fortunes of the team, the crowd was going to come into it. You just felt like the crowd, who was, largely reduced to hushed silence in the first half, if their team started to get some traction, they felt like the proverbial jack in the box, just ready to jump out. And that fear and paranoia in the back of my mind absolutely came to fruition in the next 30 minutes. I will note that Caleb Clark went off around minute 48. I thought he'd done a hamstring again or something. It actually looks like he was knocked silly, so I'm sure he was getting a head injury assessment, but he could barely walk straight. He was on jelly legs, so they pulled him off. The Scots, they knew there was space out wide, but they had to capture the All Blacks in the tight first. So they started leaning on their rolling maul a lot in the second half. And look, it was a powerful rolling maul. Ardie Savea cynically pulled it down. Cody Taylor, I think, also may have, been coming in from the side on that rolling maul. So that's a credit to Scotland, though. I mean, when you see great players like that pulling off cynical tactics, that means that they're not able to legally stop the momentum. So full credit to Scotland. They got a rolling maul try here to make it a 10-point game. The score is now 7-17. And Scotland's purple patch is also coinciding with the wobbliest patch of the game for the All Blacks. Fletcher Newell, who otherwise had been terrific in the scrum, he has a penalty go against him in the 49th minute, so Scotland goes for the corner. In the 50th minute, the Scots go for another rolling maul. Tui Pelodu brilliantly comes back inside. It looks like Scotland was going to go wide. It looked like they were going all the way to the other touchline. No, Tuipulotu absolutely sprints 100 miles an hour on an inside diagonal line. He takes it right back to his forwards, and now the Scots go wide. Kinghorn ends up feeding Stain. It is game on. I wrote here in full caps, the crowd is on fire. My only thought at this point is, I don't think Scotland can sustain this kind of intensity for 40 minutes. At some point, this purple patch has to end. I asked in my notes here, was this the end of it? It was the 54th minute. New Zealand was holding on through relentless phase play. Penalty advantage came and went for Scotland. That's how long they had the ball. But New Zealand was able to hold on and effect a turnover. And I just felt that this could be critical because you have this ebb and flow of momentum in rugby. No matter how good your team is, they're never really going to have the run of play for 80 minutes. I mean, unless it's, the Springboks or the All Blacks or the Wallabies or England, playing the 25th ranked team in the world, I mean, short of a tier 1 team playing an absolute minnow. Really, when you have two fairly evenly matched teams, it's going to go back and forth. Scotland had that golden period for 25 minutes. They put points on the board. Question was, would it be enough? Because you just felt that based on what you saw from the ABs on attack in the first half, they had more points in them. Now, this was very different to the Irish game a week ago in Chicago, where the All Blacks were able to empty their bench and really surge home in the last quarter. The All Blacks had multiple yellow cards in this game, so they were more fatigued than they were against Ireland. They just didn't quite have that spring in their step towards the end. They had to dig a lot deeper. And not just that, but you actually saw the bench getting deployed a bit earlier. Ethan de Groot, for instance, he went off for a blood bin. So Tamati Williams was already on earlier in the game. There wasn't a sense of the All Blacks, keeping all their powder dry towards the end. There was actually a sense of these guys could hit the wall at some point. But in the 54th minute, both teams had the same idea. The All Blacks brought on 2 new props, and Scotland brought 4 fresh players off the bench. In the 56th minute, the flying winger for Scotland, Graham, he goes over the line, but Cam Roigard absolutely hammers him and dislodges the ball. One of the most important plays of the game, a gutsy play from Cam Roigard there. We needed that. Soon after that, Peter Lakai pulls a not releasing the ball penalty out of Scotland, and Ardie Savea is back on the field. The All Blacks have 15 men instead of 14. We're taking deep breaths. However, the play could only be described as breathless. Dempsey intercepted off an All Blacks line-out. He goes all the way into the New Zealand 22. There are various turnovers either way, but it ends up with Scotland winning a penalty for Damian McKenzie being offside, a very harsh penalty. But regardless, Finn Russell steps up and kicks it. Now it is 17 all. What do the All Blacks really not need? I'm going to say a third yellow card, and yet that is exactly what happened. Wallace Sititi gets sent off for a deliberate back down of an attacking Scottish ball. Oh boy, look. Frustration, right? If you're a New Zealander, like this aspect of the game, the ill discipline was absolutely galling. Here's the thing. No complaints about that second yellow card that we got to Ardie Savea. You know, he pulled down a rolling maul. That was a reflection of the quality of the Scottish rolling maul. Tripping a player and just batting a ball down in the line, these are dumb yellow cards. These are avoidable. The positive way to look at it is they're kind of silly one-off mistakes. But unfortunately, they've been too prevalent for the All Blacks this year. You know, you go back to Buenos Aires, multiple yellow cards. There's just some really, really boneheaded mistakes being made, amateurish mistakes being made at times. And, you know, again, I think the All Blacks were the better team today. And the score could have been in the 30s, I think, had they not incurred these mindless yellow cards. So that's definitely something to work on for them, improving the discipline. But perhaps that just comes down to fatigue, you know, and Scotland worked them hard today, worked them to the bone. In the 68th minute, the All Blacks go for a kick pass instead of putting the ball through the hands. I thought that was fairly interesting. It showed that Scotland was doing a much better job shutting down the New Zealand attack in the second half. But finally, the ABs are out of their own half. That's the first time in the entire second half that they haven't been camped in their own territory. Scotland was absolutely dominating territory for most of that second half. That's how they got a foothold in the game. That's how they came pretty close to a famous win. We needed a bit of magic here, and we got it from Damian McKenzie in the 70th minute. The most sublime 50-22 you've ever seen. Absolutely inch perfect. This ball dribbled over the line, you know, about 3 meters from the try line. This thing was money. All Blacks get a penalty in the 72nd minute. They could go for the 3 points, but they're just a little apprehensive about that Scottish attacking power. They go for the corner. They take the line out. I stopped taking notes at this point. I was just losing my mind, but ultimately the All Blacks recycle enough that they draw the Scottish D narrow. The ball goes wide, and Damian McKenzie comes in with one of the most clutch, acrobatic, athletic finishes you've ever seen.
Simpson gets him. McKenzie against Kinghorn. Oh, it's a fucking try! Let's go, boys!
He misses the conversion, but now the All Blacks are up by 5. The game is still not safe. There's about 5 minutes to go here, where Scotland could score a converted try and pull off a famous win. But in the 76th minute, a crucial turnover. The All Blacks go for a line-out. They milk a penalty off a resulting rolling maul, and Damian McKenzie steps up and kicks the match winner. The ABs are 8 points up. That is the final scoreline that you finish with, and you have to say one of the greatest bench performances ever from a New Zealand player. Yeah, recency bias, whatever. I didn't care about recency bias. That was memorable stuff from McKenzie. 50-22. Try. Winning penalty. That's the trifecta that won this game for the All Blacks almost single-handedly. Sure, you could say that there was an offside penalty against him. There was one bad kick. Yeah, it wasn't flawless, but we didn't need flawless. We needed impact. He got us down the right end of the field. He scored the winning try. He kicked the winning penalty. I give it a 10 out of 10. Even if there were some flaws, that's 10 out of 10 impact. That is as close as you'll ever see to one man coming off the bench and winning the game for his team. That's what DMac did today. So he's worth his weight in gold. Look, perhaps you prefer Barrett starting at 10. I think I do at this point. But, you know, anyone who thinks DMac shouldn't be in the New Zealand 23, and I'm not sure there are many out there, but anyone who thinks that after watching this game, you're kidding yourself. Absolutely world class. All right, guys, how are you feeling? I think the feedback's going to be super interesting to this. I could see you being very frustrated. I think I do need to take a deep breath, probably watch a replay in a couple of days and look at what really went wrong in that second half for the All Blacks, because I don't want to gloss over some really bad mistakes and some poor play at times from New Zealand. Regardless, Scotland is a good team, laden with Lions. This was a monumental occasion, an historic occasion. You're not going to get better atmosphere than that. You're not going to get better crowd support than that anywhere on planet Earth. The passion was through the roof. The passion and intensity in that stadium was an 11 out of 10 when that crowd found their voice. So this was a cauldron, every bit as intense as Ellis Park, Stade de France, Twickenham, and the All Blacks came through. And that's what I am stoked about. The winning percentage is high this year, higher than last year. The Grand Slam is alive, although England's going to be one hell of a challenge. And there were times today, particularly that clinical first half, where you felt, yep, that's the All Blacks. That's the All Blacks we've known and loved for 100 years. Still mistakes being made, but I feel we're trending in the right direction, back to a new era of prosperity. That's my glass half full take. What do you guys think? Sound off in the comments. I'll read them all. Until then, please like, subscribe, send this video to somebody who loves rugby, and I'll be back very soon to break down the France Springboks game. I'll catch you guys then. Take it easy. Bye for now.